Here with more, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon. Christopher, do you believe the UFOs exist?
We know that UFOs exist. This is not no longer an issue. The Navy itself has publicly acknowledged the fact that they exist, and Navy pilots, active duty pilots, have gone on the record in the New York Times acknowledging the fact that they exist. So the issue now is, why are they here? Where are they coming from? And what is the technology behind these devices that we're observing?
Are there indications that these unidentified flying objects are doing things that this world is not capable of?
There are indications, actually. The Nimitz incident, a famous example of this, which was well documented by multiple radars, multiple pilots in broad daylight. That vehicle demonstrated speeds in excess of 5,000 miles an hour. It was able to hover 50 feet above the ocean after descending from above 80,000 feet. So the pilots who are observing these craft are absolutely mystified, and that comes through clearly in their public statements.
This was extremely abrupt, like a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall. The ability to hover over the water and then start a vertical climb from basically 0 up towards about 12,000 feet, and then accelerate in less than 2 seconds and disappear is something I had never seen in my life.
The bottom line, what do you think this was?
I believe, as do the other folks that were on the flight, that when we visually saw it, that it was something not from this world.
It's hard to understand, how do these vehicles maintain lift? How are they propelled? There are no wing surfaces, there's no exhaust. So there's nothing that we're familiar with that we've deployed in the air that has a power source other than chemical energy like fuel. These are so radically different than anything we're familiar with. And their performance is so advanced and so sophisticated, it's frankly just baffling.
So is it fair to boil it down to two possibilities? Either another country has leapfrogged the United States in technology, or extraterrestrial?
Those are the leading hypotheses, yes.
Do you believe, based on your decade of serving in the U.S. government on this question, that the U.S. government has in its possession any material from one of these aircrafts?
I do, yes.
You think the U.S. government has debris from a UFO in its possession right now?
Unfortunately, Tucker, I really have to be careful of my NDA. I really can't go into a lot of more detail in that.
Okay.
But simply put, yes.
In my association with Project Blue Book, I know very well that it was not a scientific project. Also, I also know that they never would notify the media when an interesting case came up. They did everything they could to keep it down. So they definitely withheld information.
You know, when I first interviewed Alan years ago, there was a theory going around that anybody who saw a flying saucer was probably befuddled by swamp gas somewhere in Louisiana and didn't know what he or she was seeing. We've had a lot of documentation since that time.
I think that one of the main things that has come out here that Peter has done is to substantiate the credibility of many of the civilians, because it was easy to, and still is, to discredit a civilian. Much more difficult to discredit a military man. In Blue Book, for instance, we would get reports from military pilots, and that was particularly embarrassing to the Air Force, because after they had trained those men, and they couldn't very well, they could say that a civilian pilot might have been untrustworthy, but they could hardly say that of their own military pilots, and we got case after case after case from military pilots which never hit the press. There are three things about this whole thing, Tom, that no one can deny. They're incontrovertible points. Even the grossest skeptic can't deny them. First of all is that the UFO reports not only exist but persist. See, when I started with the Air Force, I thought that this was a fad. In a few years would just disappear.
Be all over, okay.
And it's global. We have reports now from 140 countries. I mean, practically as many countries as there are in the United Nations. And the most important of the three things is that many, unfortunately not all, but many of the reports come from highly, highly credible, technically trained people, you see. The phenomenon has not changed a great deal. It has not changed materially since 1947. And I'm quite sure that neither we nor the Russians had anything like the capabilities demonstrated by the UFOs in 47. I don't think we have now. So I've given up the whole idea that it could possibly be from any place on Earth.
To accept that some object overfly and the country being unable to clear the sky of the... You cannot admit it.
a story this big, there's no way it could be kept secret from the public. What do you say to someone like that that says that?
Well, somebody's kept it pretty secret for quite a while, haven't they?
There have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered, and there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge and have been attempting to conceal this knowledge or not permit it to be widely disseminated.
Well, these objects kept coming over at flying the same kind of formation that we fly in our fighters.
Where were you flying?
We were flying in Germany, and we were flying F-86s. And they would come over and do the same maneuvers that we make, except every once in a while one of them would go zip. And you just can't do that in a fighter, a conventional fighter. Well, yeah, they weren't just random. They were flying fighter formations, very definitely under positive control. They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic looking. I think they were definitely piloted vehicles, each one with the pilot in it, and very definitely in communication with one another, because they would have flights of more than 4. They'd have flights of maybe 12 or 16, all across, and when they make a turn, they'd cross the flights in under, and they had to be in communication. But this time I was involved in the research and development and doing very classified programs myself, you know, at the test center. So I knew that we didn't have any vehicles of that kind, and I was 99 and 9/10% sure that the Russians didn't have any of that type either. So it there certainly was, at that point in time, there was no doubt in my mind that this vehicle was made at some other place than here on Earth. In my opinion, I think they were worried that it would panic the public if they knew that someone had vehicles that had this kind of performance way back right after World War II, period of time. So they started telling lies about it. And then I think they had to cover another lie, you know, tell another lie to cover their first lie, and now they don't know how to get out of it. Now it's going to be so embarrassing to admit that all these administrations have told a lot of untruths that it's going to be embarrassing to get out of it.
As I closed on this thing, well, it looked like a weather balloon, and that's what I presumed it was. And I had plenty of gas and time, so I decided I'd just come back around and make a pass on it. And I got around where I should have been coming back on this thing. All of a sudden, it didn't look like a balloon anymore. It looked like a saucer sitting on edge, about a 45-degree angle. I didn't have any gun camera film on board, unfortunately, or I'd have shot some pictures of it. And about that time, I guess whatever it was, for whatever reason, just took off climbing at about a 45-degree angle and just accelerated and disappeared. And I obviously couldn't follow it with an old piston engine fighter. So I turned around and went home.
Since my name has become connected with UFO matters in quite a big way in this country, and in one or two other countries too, I have frequently been asked by a person of my background, a former chief of the defense staff, a former chairman of the NATO military committee, why I think there is a cover-up, or what the reasons may be for governments wishing to cover up the facts about UFOs. And a number of explanations have often been put forward, of which the most frequent and perhaps the most plausible is that the governments concerned, which are primarily that of the United States and that of my own country, believe that if they told the truth, which is that there are objects in our atmosphere which are technically miles in advance of anything that we can deploy, that we have no means of stopping them coming here, and that we have no defense against them should they be hostile, that, I believe, is because governments fear that if they did disclose those facts, people would panic. People would rush about, jam the switchboard like they did on that famous day in New York when there was a spoof, Martians have landed. people will go mad and they'll jump up and down. I don't believe that at all. I've said so in print. I've said it in the foreword I wrote to one of Timothy Good's books. I do not believe that people today, in the 21st century, are going to panic at that sort of information. After all, they have put up with the introduction of nuclear weapons, the destruction of 2 Japanese cities 50 years ago. They put up, not put up with, it's the wrong word, they take as a matter of course that we can land vehicles on Mars. They land to the precise instant, forecast years before, vehicles on distant planets. Why should they panic? We are being visited and have been visited for many years by people from outer space, from other civilizations, that it behoves us, in case some of these people in the future or now should turn hostile, to find out who they are, where they come from, and what they want. This should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers.
There is abundant evidence that we are being contacted, that civilizations have been visiting us for a very long time, that their appearance is bizarre from any kind of traditional materialistic Western point of view.
The case of contact, of course, the evidence is overwhelming. There's something happening. Tens of thousands of UFO photographs, very well-grounded researchers researching the abduction phenomenon. And we realize that something is happening, something is unfolding. We can't deny that.
Thanks so much, Professor, for coming on. So with this announcement by the United States Navy, what has changed? What is different now that they've said this?
We are now witnessing a tipping point. You see, the burden of proof used to be on the believers to prove that UFOs are real. Now the burden of proof has shifted to the government and the military to prove that they're not real. But the evidence is overwhelming. We have all this information from U.S. Navy pilots. We now have metrics. We can actually measure how fast they travel, how high they are, what kinds of centrifugal forces that they can experience. And science, remember, is based on things that are testable, reproducible, and falsifiable. Now we have testable information, a game changer.
Do you also believe that UFOs have come to Earth?
There has been and is an existing presence, an ET presence. And I spent millions and millions. I probably spent more as an individual than anybody else in the United States has ever spent on this subject.
Is it risky for you to say, you know, in public that you believe in UFOs and aliens?
I don't care.
You don't worry that some people will say, did you hear that guy? He sounds like he's crazy.
I don't care.
Why not?
It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to change reality of what I know.
Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You can find it here.
Yeah.
It's a clear blue sky. There's no wind. And you see this tic-tac. It's just this white object that's randomly moving around. It makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up a little bit. I remember telling my back seater, I said, dude, I don't know about you, but I'm a little weirded out. It's not a helicopter. It doesn't have rotor wash. There's no propulsion. There's no wings. It rapidly accelerates and disappears. Like, poof, gone. Weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. I chased a UFO.
That was one of the most amazing things to us, or at least to me, was that these objects would be out there all day, and the speeds that they're exhibiting, as well as the flight characteristics. There's no platform or really energy source that I'm aware of that could allow something to stay in the air as long as these objects were.
Well, maybe these objects are Russian or Chinese, but your piece points out Russia and China have literally lost aircraft chasing these things. So they're not Russian or Chinese.
So we have a declassified British government document, which is a research document into UFOs, that points out a couple of times, actually, that about 4 Soviet pilots, perhaps Russian pilots since, were lost trying to engage these aircraft.
Were killed.
Were killed,
Does it say how?
Doesn't say how. And I haven't been able to find out how. I did hear from someone, though, engaged was an appropriate term to use, so that they were trying to shoot these things down, was the implication.
Okay, so if Russia, China, and the U.S. have all had this experience, then these are not.
These are not. And I think that's a pretty clear assessment on the part of the military.
These are not made by human beings.
No. Well, yeah, I think that's a fair assessment based on the capabilities, especially with some of the aircraft that the Navy have seen in recent years are manifesting, right? That you have things that are going hundreds of knots under the water, anti-gravity, instantaneous hypersonic acceleration, that you have basically capability performance without jet propulsion.
Right.
This stuff is not stuff that China or Russia have anywhere near the capability
or
of.
that physics can explain.
Exactly.
So why is the Pentagon lying about this? Why have they lied about it for so long?
I mean, you know, that's the golden question. I think one reason is that a lot of people in the Pentagon fully don't understand what this is. I think they come to the conclusion it ain't from here.
Yeah.
But beyond that, they're somewhat flummoxed.
And you think they have come to that conclusion?
Yes. Yes, confidently.
They think this is extraterrestrial, just to be totally blunt about it.
Or extra-dimensional, something extra, let's put it that way.
It's not from this world.
Not from this world, and not from Elon Musk. You know, some people say maybe it's some secret billionaire somewhere. It's too advanced.
What concern should we be about the briefing that you received on UFOs? Is that a concern that for pilots? Is there anything you can mention to us about that?
Well, I think some of the press reports are accurate. I think people are taking this issue much more seriously, and you know, I'm not going to get into any of the contents of the briefing. It was a classified briefing, but what I think one of the key takeaways I'd have is that the military and others are taking this issue seriously, which I think in previous generations may not have been the case.
Not 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, 20 people, but hundreds and hundreds of people have seen these things, sometimes all at the same time. We've had some of our military installations in South Dakota, up that way, our missile defense system where they've come out, there they are up there, the people at the base. And since then, in recent months, we've had pilots who they were originally, Sam, they were afraid to tell their superiors, hey, I was out there and I saw this, because they afraid it would hurt their promotions, which it would have done. But now, pilots have said, now they have an obligation to start reporting them. And the reason for that is some of the work that we did. And it's been good, because as I've said before, you know that China's doing it. We know that Russia, which is led by someone who was head of the KGB, you know they're doing it. And so we better take a look at it too, because with what the pilots have said, the vehicles that they see, we do not have any type of ability to do what they do.
The most important facts for us and the American people to understand are the facts that haven't been said today. And the reason why they haven't been said is that they are largely classified. And the reason that's important is that the American people have no idea, really no idea, about the immensity of the threat in space. And I've made this comment in a classified setting, that I wish the American people could be present in this room, not this room, but the SCIF, because our adversaries know what they are doing, we know what they are doing, they know, we know what they are doing, but the American people have no idea. And so this discussion and debate will have very little interest in the American public. It's carried on in a level of, forgive me, bureaucratic language that most Americans would have trouble seeing an immediacy in their daily lives. But if they were privy to what we hear, and you know it much better than we do because you live it, I think they'd be pretty alarmed. And this is not by way of criticism of you, because you're living with the strictures of what is classified and not, but I think we have a real obligation to explain to the American people why space is a domain that matters, why the threats there are real and urgent, why they are growing in importance.